Hello. This little video is meant to explain a couple of concepts. One of them is audience, purpose, and structure, and the other is, of course, a subordinate point, which is general versus specific. General versus specific is quite an important thing to pay attention to because it shows you sort of how an essay is put together. All right, to begin with, audience, purpose, and audience and purpose. We said that the Sawhill essay was published by the Brookings Institution, and what we did learn, we went ahead and looked up Isabel Sawhill, and we saw that she's on the board, so she's been working for the Brookings Institution for some time. And this is just a little Wikipedia article. It's a very nice, quick way to get a whole bunch of information. And it's usually reliable in so far as what we're doing right now, which is just trying to find out what is the Brookings Institution and what does it do. It's a century-old American research group pardon me, on Think Tank Row in Washington, D.C. Presumably we have lots of think tanks in Washington, D.C. located there perhaps because they have some form of government interest. The institution conducts research excuse me, and education in the social sciences, primarily economics, metropolitan policy, governance, foreign policy, global economy, and development. So we can see that education is not a primary interest of the Brookings Institution, but it falls in place when you consider the concepts of economics and governance, of course, because what resources we devote to education and what resources we hope to get back out certainly influence the economy and the government. The Brookings stated mission is to provide innovative and practical recommendations that advance three broad goals. They want to strengthen American democracy, and we could tell that that was Isabel Sawhill's objective when she's talking about leveling the playing field. They want to foster economic and social welfare. And if they're wanting to do that for democracy, presumably they don't just want to foster the social welfare of the few and the wealthy, but presumably of the nation as a whole. They are interested in security, and here we go, opportunity of all Americans. And finally, they're interested in international interests. Secure a more open, safe, prosperous, and cooperative international system. And we were asking, is this institution left-leaning or right-leaning? Brookings states that its staff represent diverse points of view. It describes itself as nonpartisan. And the media sometimes describes Brookings as either conservative, centrists, or liberals, probably depending on whether or not the particular media outlet is conservative, centrist, or liberal. Anyway, an academic analysis of congressional records from 1992 to 2002 found that Brookings was referenced by conservative politicians nearly as frequently as liberal politicians, earning a score of 53 on a 1 to 100 scale, with 100 representing the most liberal score. So barely, if at all, one could say it's slightly liberal-leaning, but not very likely. It looks like it is indeed a centrist organization, and that it is a practical organization. So it would have an interest in making sure that the resources that are put into our institutions do some good. Okay, so how does that speak to audience and purpose? Well, it suggests that Isabel Sawhill's purpose for writing this essay falls in line with the Brookings Institution's main goals, which are democracy and social welfare. So that is why she would be writing an essay called Higher Education and the Opportunity Gap, why she would be concerned with leveling the playing field in higher education, and why this essay does those things. Okay, the next thing I wanted to get to in this little video is general versus specific claims. And so I've taken Isabel Sawhill's essay and I've done a little bit of highlighting here, as you can see, marking the most general statements in blue, the middling general statements in green, the specific statements in yellow, and the very specific statements in red. So if you look at paragraph 1, this is an introduction paragraph, and of course you want your first sentence always to be on the general side because you want it to be inviting. So, general claim, America faces an opportunity gap. That's clear, it's concise, it's also a general point. And the nature of that opportunity gap is those born in the bottom ranks have difficulty moving up. And this is therefore a middling general statement. It explains this, but it's a little bit more specific. And then we have in yellow, children born into the top fifth of the income distribution have about twice as much of a chance of becoming middle class or better in their adult years as those born in the bottom fifth. Well, that's quite a bit more specific than the previous statement. And then the last sentence here, in short, higher education is not the kind of mobility-enhancing vehicle that it could be. That is nearly as general as the opening statement. So this paragraph has moved from a very general point to a little more specific and a little more specific. And this is, I suppose, more specific than that. And then the last sentence goes back out into the general. This paragraph really kind of shows us more or less the shape of the essay as a whole, where there tends to be kind of a more general statement toward the top of a paragraph. The more specific information tends to be in the middle. So let's go back here. This is a very short paragraph in comparison to others. This is the claim for the paragraph. The flaw in the simple argument being that low-income students would be encouraged to go to college and that they would be funded, publicly funded for going to college, Pell Grants and whatnot, and cheaper tuition at public institutions, blah, blah, blah. Okay, the flaw in the simple argument that these efforts will lead to leveling the playing field. The flaw is that the problem is no longer primarily enrollment. The problem is completion. That low-income students are going to college, they're just not finishing. Okay, so that's certainly a more specific statement than America faces an opportunity gap. But it's a claim that needs support. And what's that support? Almost half of all college students and much higher proportions of poor and minority students drop out before they complete a degree. So this is a more specific statement than that one, and it helps to support the claim that the low-income students are not completing college. And then we have a very much more specific statement following that. Community colleges, the sector that enrolls the majority of less advantaged and older students, have experienced staggering dropout rates. About 54% of their students don't complete a degree, receive a certificate, or transfer to a four-year institution within 6 years. Okay, so you can see how this is, it's got statistical data, it's got specific ways in which the measurement of completion can be made, so it's a lot more specific than that. And in general, that is the way that Sawhill's essay is structured. It is structured really from general to specific. Okay. Now, I'm going to suggest to you also that this is what we call an inductive overall structure, not because it's general to specific, but because the essay tends to move from premise to conclusion. This is the kind of organization that you typically see in a science paper or a social science paper. And indeed, there are other markings that this is a social science paper. For example, if you look at the fact that it's a references page, this is a term that's used in the social sciences to indicate a bibliography. You can see that the year of publication comes right after the names of the authors. We don't do that in the humanities. We don't do that in this class. You won't do that in English 1A. This is what you would do if you're taking sociology, psychology, anthropology, if you're taking child development, if you're taking criminology. This is the way that these things are marked in the social sciences. So let's go on and look. The essay moves from premise 1. Premise 1 is basically, and I'm summarizing here, Sahil says that what we are doing to level the playing field is very expensive and not working. Notice how that kind of summarizes the first 3 paragraphs, really. To premise 2, to premise 3, but she has premise after premise after premise before she gets to her conclusion. Her conclusion being that more effort needs to be put into, here we go. This is her conclusion. Focus needs to be on improved productivity in the higher education system. That, we would say, is a general statement. What specifically does she want to do? Well, she wants to increase resources for technical education, for online learning. She wants to increase resources for high school training, for technical learning, and kind of give up on the notion that all students are prepared or even want to go to college in order to support themselves. So that's it. We have talked about audience and purpose, what we can determine from a publication by looking at where it is published, and get an idea about who's going to be reading it, which would largely be centrists who are interested in equality and economic development. And we looked at general versus specific, and how we can see that the arrangement of general versus specific statements, the ordering of things, tells us about the structure. Okay, so that's it.